Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for this webinar is REopt Lite, Sizing Solar+Storage for Savings and Resiliency with NREL's new tool. This webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project, and we have with us two guest speakers from NREL to talk with us about the REopt Lite tool. We also have on the line Seth Mullendore, who is a project director here at Clean Energy Group. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can connect using your telephone if you'd like to, or using your computer mic and speakers. And there are some instructions on your screen for that. If you'd like to minimize your webinar control panel so that you can see the webinar full screen, you can use the little orange button that you see circled there. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on the webinar console and hitting send. We will be reading through your questions as they come in, and we'll save about 15 minutes at the end of our presentation for a Q&A with the audience. We'll get to as many questions as we can. We do expect to have a lot of people on this webinar. A lot of people have registered. So to make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email within about 48 hours with a copy of the webinar recording, with a link to that, and with a PDF of the webinar slides. You can also find that and all of our previous webinars archived on our website at resilient-power.org. So with that, I will pass it over to our host for this webinar, Seth Mullendore.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited about this webinar. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about who we are at Clean Energy Group and the Resilient Power Project. Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit. We are completely foundation funded. A number of the foundations that support us are listed here. We also have a sister organization that's called Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a membership organization of agencies that manage state clean energy funds like system benefit charges. So with the next slide, I'm going to introduce the Resilient Power Project. The Resilient Power Project is now in our fourth year. The goal of the project is to increase access of resilient power technologies, really solar and energy storage, to low-income and otherwise disadvantaged communities. We do this at a number of different levels, both at the federal and state levels, trying to help folks craft policies and programs that can increase access for vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. And as well, we work all the way down to working with city officials and individual project developers. The project focus is two main focus areas. One is affordable housing, often multifamily housing. The other is critical community facilities, such as emergency shelters or food banks or anything that provides services in an emergency. At the project level, we provide high-level technical and financial assistance for folks, as well as we do have the ability through our foundations to offer some small pre-development technical assistance grants to help folks get the initial technical feasibility and financial feasibility of a project to see if it makes sense to move forward. We do a lot of these webinars, we do reporting, we put out newsletters, and really put out a lot of information, which is all available on our website that Sam mentioned, the resilient-power.org. Those are some of our reports were at the bottom there. This is a look at our website. We have a lot of tools on there. Anyone who's interested in resilient power, solar, and storage for these applications, I urge you to check that out and take a look, or get a hold of me or one of my colleagues. So with that, I am going to introduce you to our panelists for today to talk about the National Renewable Energy Lab's new tool called REopt Lite. We are lucky to have two folks from NREL here. We have Kate Anderson, who leads the engineering and modeling group at NREL. And she leads a team of technical experts who support government and private entities with techno-economic modeling and analysis, field assessments, design and implementation of energy efficiency, renewable energy, storage, and microgrids. Kate is the lead program lead for the development of NREL's REopt model, which is used to evaluate cost-optimal selection and sizing of behind-the-meter energy assets for grid-connected and off-grid energy systems. Kate's work includes providing technical assistance on efficiency and renewable energy technologies to meet energy goals, developing net zero energy strategies, valuing energy security, and evaluating PV interconnection solutions on secondary network distribution systems. Prior to joining NREL, Kate launched satellites as a captain in the U.S. Air Force. We also have with us Emma Elgqvist, and she's an engineer in the Integrated Application Center's Engineering and Modeling Group. As part of the REopt team, Emma's work includes providing technical assistance and development guidance on renewable energy technologies to meet aggressive energy goals, conducting renewable energy screenings, and evaluating renewable energy and storage development potential. Emma also leads the NREL efforts of FEMP's Technical Assistance Program and portal, which provides agencies with support in the most critical areas of renewable energy project development. With that, I would like to turn it over to Kate and Emma, and I will be back later to moderate questions after their presentation.
Thanks, Seth. Hi, everyone. This is Kate Anderson. As Seth mentioned, I lead the REopt development team at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and we're really excited to share the beta version of the REopt Lite tool with you today and to get your feedback. So we're going to start with an overview of the REopt model, and then we will dive into a demo of REopt Lite. So REopt is a techno-economic energy optimization model, and we use it to help building owners, campuses, and communities meet their cost savings and energy performance goals. REopt has been developed at NREL since 2007 and has been used to provide analysis services at over 10,000 sites so far. Some of the key distinguishing features of REopt are optimization, integration, and automation. So we use optimization to find the most cost-effective mix and size of technologies to meet energy goals. And by using optimization, the user does not have to specify specific sizes of technologies to evaluate. Rather, we use the optimization feature to find the most cost-effective system sizes. We also evaluate technologies as an integrated set of resources, which means that rather than evaluating a technology one at a time in isolation, we look at a range of electric and thermal technologies and consider the integration and interactions between all those technologies. And then finally, we incorporate a lot of automation into the tool, and this helps us to conduct analyses quickly and with limited data, sometimes over a large portfolio of sites. So REopt is used to provide decision support analysis throughout the energy planning process, which is shown here on this slide, from agency-level macro planning all the way through project development and then microgrid or resiliency analyses. And so you can see on this slide here on the left, we often start at this master planning phase, and this is typically an agency or a company will come to us that has hundreds or thousands of sites that are spread out all over the country or sometimes all over the world, and they have some kind of energy goal to meet. It could be as simple as just minimizing their cost of energy, or they may have some renewable energy or carbon goals, such as achieving 30% renewable energy or getting to net zero. And so at this master planning stage, we can start to help prioritize where the best opportunities are for renewable energy projects. And we can also help to frame what the cost of those energy goals might be. So is this $1 million investment? Is this $1 billion investment? And how does it compare to your current baseline? So compared to the utility costs you're paying right now, are these projects going to save you money, or is it going to cost more money to meet these energy goals? And the graphic that's shown there in the bottom left is an example of one of the projects that we did for the Army, where we helped them to identify some of their renewable energy opportunities. The middle panel here, economic dispatch, so this describes a more detailed level of analysis. So typically after that master planning step, where we've looked at hundreds or thousands of sites, we narrow it down. And so then we do a more detailed look at perhaps the top 10 sites. So in that master planning stage, we typically are looking at sites based on their location, their annual energy consumption, and their annual energy costs. So some pretty high-level data. When we dive down into sites in more detail in this middle step, we get 15-minute utility interval data. We look at their complex utility rate tariff, and then we can start to refine our recommendations. So again, here we're looking at the technology types and sizes that will minimize the cost of electricity to the site while also meeting their energy goals. And we're also looking at optimal operating strategies at this stage. So this is particularly important for dispatchable technologies. So for things like storage, where you need to decide when to charge and discharge your battery, the optimization model is really useful in determining the most cost-effective way to do that. And then on the right there, the final stage that we sometimes look at for, again, just a subset of sites is a resiliency analysis. So for some of our clients, at some of their sites, they have a really critical load that needs to be maintained during a grid outage. So in these cases, we can look at how integrating renewable energy alongside their existing backup power systems can help them to extend the amount of time that they can survive a grid outage. And that helps us to start to quantify the resiliency benefit of renewable energy. One last thing I'll mention on this slide is that by using one platform for all of these phases, the analysis cost and time can be reduced because the data that's collected at the initial planning stage can kind of be continually refined throughout this process as we go down into the more detailed levels. The next slide here describes REopt inputs and outputs. In the center there is the REopt energy planning platform, so that's the model that we've developed here at NREL. It's a mixed integer linear program. It's a mathematical model that's written in the Mozo programming language, and we do a lot of site-specific and client-specific customizations to it. It solves an energy balance at each time step. So if we were doing a 15-minute analysis, that would be 35,000 time steps for the entire year. And then in each time step, the load needs to be met from some combination of grid purchases, on-site generation, or discharge from storage. And this does not consider any power flow or transient effects. So if we look at the graphic here, you can see on the bottom the loads that we input to the model. So we can consider electric loads, thermal loads, and water demand. And then on the left are the technology options that we consider to meet those loads. So we look at a variety of renewable energy generation technologies. We have 3 listed here on this slide, but we also look at landfill gas, waste to energy, solar vent preheat, solar hot water, ground source heat pumps. We're currently adding fuel cells. So we look at a range of potential renewable generation technologies. And then we also look at conventional generation. So first and foremost, the utility grid, but then also conventional backup generators, such as diesel or natural gas backup generators. We look at energy storage, so we often evaluate batteries, and we can also look at thermal storage or water tanks, and then also dispatchable technology. So these are things like heating and cooling or water treatment loads that can be moved around to align better with generation. And then finally, via Open Studio, we can model energy conservation measures. Now on the top are the things that we consider the key drivers of the analysis. So because this is a techno-economic optimization model, the economics are very important to this. So the utility costs, including the energy charges, the demand charges, the expected escalation rate for how those utility costs are going to change in the future are really important to the analysis. Also the economic parameters like the cost of each technology, so the installed cost of PV, the annual operating cost, as well as any incentives that are available are important, as well as things like the discount rate for how you're going to discount future costs back. And then we can put certain goals as constraints in the model. So if, again, someone might have a goal to get to net zero or to sustain their critical load on site for 7 days, those are the kinds of constraints that we can put in the model to inform the end solution. And then on the right is what comes out of the model. So this is the optimized minimum cost solution, which includes the technologies recommended, both the type and the size of them, how we recommend you operate those technologies, which is the optimal dispatch, and then finally the project economics. So that's the capital cost, the annual operating cost, the life cycle cost, and the overall net present value of the investment. Next, we're going to show a few project examples. So this just gives you a better idea of how we use the model. This first example is an example of that master planning that we looked at on a previous slide. So this is where we screen hundreds of sites to identify the best opportunities for renewable energy. So this particular example comes from a screening that we did for Time Warner Cable. They asked us to look at 696 sites across the country and identify cost-effective opportunities for solar PV, wind, and ground source heat pumps. So this particular graphic is showing the results for PV. We identified 306 cost-effective PV projects among those 696 sites evaluated. The total size of those projects was about 39 megawatts. And if they had implemented all these projects, they would have had a net present value of $37 million, which means that after all of the investment costs in PV were accounted for, they would have saved $37 million over the project life cycle compared to what they were paying the utility. These projects in total would have generated about 65 gigawatt hours of renewable energy and would have provided about 10.5% of the energy needs of these Time Warner Cable sites. And so this is just an example of how we start to identify and prioritize cost-effective projects. You can see in the map that the larger bubbles have larger net present values. So those might be the locations that you start at because those offer the greatest opportunities for savings. The next slide provides an example of one of the more detailed analyses. So this is when we dive into more depth on one site in particular. So this was looking at a site in Southern California that was interested in PV and batteries for cost savings. And so we got the 15-minute electric load from the site and modeled their utility rate tariff, which was the SCE time of use 8 tariff. And we found that 12.4 megawatts of PV and a 2.4 megawatt, 3.7 megawatt hour storage system would provide about $19 million of savings over the life cycle of the system. In the upper right corner there, you can look at the dispatch strategy for the system. So this shows a week. The load line is marked in black at the top. And then in each hour, that load needs to be met by energy purchases from the grid, PV, or storage. So you can see that PV is generating when the resource is available. But for storage, you need to decide when to operate it. And so in each time period in this analysis, there's a decision to be made about whether to charge, discharge, or do nothing with the battery. And if you decide to charge or discharge, then you need to know how much. And so using this economic optimization model really allows you to identify the size of storage and the associated dispatch strategy that maximizes the economic benefit of that integrated system. So in this graph up here on the right, you can see that early in the day, PV is meeting a lot of the load on its own and can shave the peak on its own. But then later in the day over here on the right, the storage needs to fill in to continue that peak demand shaving. And so they're really effective together because, well, PV can meet a lot of the demand for a lot of the day. As PV starts to trail off at the end of the day, the storage kind of fills in on the shoulder here. And so this is where we get the full peak shaving. And at this particular site, the demand charges are different throughout the day. So we're actually shaving PV to different levels. So there's one period here where the load is getting shaved to this level. And then in here, there's a different time of use charge at this time of day when the load is getting shaved to a different level. And so that's, it's a pretty complex problem. This is why an optimization model is really so powerful here, is because it can take in that load, that varying utility rate tariff, and figure out how to best dispatch these systems. Down here on the right, you can see where we're getting these savings from. And so there is a facility demand charge at this site, as well as a peak and an off-peak demand charge. And so a lot of these savings here are coming from peak demand savings, but you're also getting some reduction all year long from the facility demand charge savings. And then one final project example. So this is an example of resiliency analysis, where we look at how renewable energy can be used to extend survivability. So this is, again, is a case study that we did in Southern California. This site had 2.5 megawatts of existing backup diesel generation and about 4,500 gallons of diesel fuel on site. So we looked at, with just that existing backup generation and their typical utility grid supply, what the life cycle cost of their energy was. And so for the 20-year analysis that we did, the life cycle cost was about $20 million. And that backup generator with the existing on-site fuel supply could sustain the critical load for an outage of about 5 days. And you can see that in the graph here at the bottom. So The base case is the generator-only case. We ran thousands of grid outages. We simulated thousands of random grid outages of different start dates and different durations throughout the year to come up with this analysis here that shows the different probabilities of surviving an outage. And the reason that we graph it as a probability is because the amount of time that you can survive an outage depends on the time of year that the outage occurs, because the load varies by time of year. And when we integrate solar into the analysis, it also depends on the solar resource at the time of the outage. So for this analysis, we chose to set 90% as our benchmark, although you could set it at any percent you desire. And so this base case system of just diesel generators can survive, can sustain the critical load for 5 days. The next thing we did was look at the lowest cost solution. So this was looking at how can this site reduce their cost of energy the most. What we found was by installing a 625 kilowatt PV system and 175 kilowatts of storage, they would be able to reduce their life cycle cost of energy by about $500,000. So they started at a baseline of 20 million and were able to bring them down to 19.5 million by installing this solar and storage system. Now, as an ancillary benefit of that solar and storage system, if installed as part of a microgrid, can get them an extra 1 day of sustaining the grid outage. So whereas before they could survive a 5-day outage, now they're going to be able to survive a 6-day outage. And they're also getting this $500,000 of savings. And then finally what we did was we looked at one more case, and this is in blue here, the proposed system. In this case, we drove up the size of solar and storage until the life cycle cost was about the same as the base case. So in this case, you're not saving much money, but you're not spending much more money either. And what you see here is that by increasing the solar and storage size, we really drive up the resiliency of the system. So now this combined diesel generator, solar, and storage system can sustain the critical load at this site for 9 days. And so this helps people to start to understand the cost of resiliency and also the benefits that solar and storage can provide as part of a hybrid system. So we are really excited that while this capability that I've been describing has been built up at NREL over the past 10 years, we are now for the first time launching a publicly available beta version of just a subset of the REopt capabilities. This beta version evaluates the economics of grid-connected PV and battery storage at a site and allows building owners to identify the system sizes and battery dispatch strategy that minimize their life cycle cost of energy. And so we're going to go into a demo in just a second here, but I just wanted to highlight first some of the differences between the internal NREL model that I've been describing and what the REopt Lite tool can do right now. So while the internal NREL model includes a wide array of renewable energy and conventional technologies, REopt Lite for now looks only at PV and storage. So we do plan to expand this over time, but for this first beta version that we've released, right now it looks just at PV and storage. While the internal NREL model can look at multiple sites, right now the web tool is set up just to look at one site at a time. And then while the internal REopt model can also look at both electric and thermal and water data, the web tool right now looks at just electric data. And then with the rate tariffs, right now the REopt Lite web tool requires the user to select a tariff that's already been specified in the utility rate database. In the internal model, we have a lot more flexibility in terms of specifying our own custom rate tariffs or using blended rates. And that is something that we plan to add to the REopt Lite web tool this year. And then finally on resiliency analysis, the analysis that I just described to you is done using the internal REopt model, but there is a simplified version of that available in REopt Lite, and that's something that we continue to expand on and plan to roll out later this year. And so finally, before we go to the demo, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of our FY18 REopt Lite development plan. And as I mentioned, this is a beta version that we've rolled out, so we are really looking for a lot of user feedback, and we will use that to inform our development plan. So we'd really appreciate if you'd test out the tool and send us feedback, and we will integrate those recommendations into our development plan. But for now, what we have planned for FY18 is to first expose the API that sits behind the web tool. And so This will allow users to not only interact with the web tool through the web interface, but to programmatically call the model via the API and potentially integrate it into other models. We're also planning to expand the resiliency analysis portion of the tool. So we will be allowing users to design a system to a specified probability of sustaining a critical load. We'll also be providing more support around building up a critical load profile based on equipment components. We'll be allowing users to model existing diesel and PV systems, and then also incorporating the cost of microgrid components and the value of lost load, or that value of resiliency, into the modeling. The third thing listed here is user data storage. So right now you can run the model, but there's no way to come back and sort of retrieve your previous analysis results and edit them and store them. So we'll be adding that capability in FY18. We also plan to add a wind technology module. We're planning to allow the user to enter their own custom utility rate tariff rather than just needing to use the utility rate database. We'll be adding a downloadable report as well as a downloadable dispatch strategy, and then providing training materials and case studies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emma, who is going to give a demo of the current REopt Lite model.
Thanks, Kate. Give me just a second here while I switch over screens. All right, so like Kate said, this is the beta version of REopt Lite, and we're really excited for users to be able to test it out and to give feedback. And so if you want to test it out and have any questions or comments about the tool, you can click this button here, send tool feedback, and we'll be happy to answer your questions or incorporate your suggestions in future development. So the first thing you would do when starting your analysis with REopt Lite is to select the technology that you would like to evaluate. So you can either look at just PV, just batteries, or the combination of the two. The default value here is to look at the two technologies together, and that's what we're going to do for this demo. Next, you would enter the site's location. So this is used both for the solar resource and energy production, as well as to provide the utility rates that at a particular location. So we are going to consider a location here in Palmdale, California. Next, you would select if you want to upload your own hourly NREL data, or if you would like to simulate your load based on an annual energy consumption combined with a building type. So in this case, we're going to simulate our our hourly energy consumption. We're going to select the retail store, and we're going to enter 1 million for the annual energy consumption. The building types that you can currently select from here are based on the Department of Energy commercial reference buildings. And so if you click the little question mark here, you can see some information about the sizes of those buildings. Finally, you'd select your utility electricity rate. So this is based on this drop down here is based on the serving utility at the location that you entered in the first box. And we are going to select one of these utility rates here. They come from a database called the Utility Rate Database that has information about almost 47,000 different utility rates across the U.S. And so once you've selected your rate, you can click on the URDB link here, and it'll take you straight to the URDB where you can read about this particular rate that you've selected. It gives you some basic information, lists the demand charges and the energy charges and how those are structured across the months of the year and hours of the day. So you can see here that this particular rate varies kind of both between seasons and depending on the time of the day. So this is all the information that you would have to enter in order to run this analysis. When we were developing this tool, we wanted to make sure that it was easy to use for people that were perhaps not familiar with these technologies or energy modeling in general. However, the user has access to a suite of additional inputs. And so if you click the little plus signs here, it expands some additional inputs for financial inputs, PV inputs, battery input, and resiliency inputs. So we've highlighted some of the most important drivers of the results, and so those will be the first inputs that pop up. So the default electricity cost escalation rate here is 2.6%, and that's based on the EIA average value for the U.S. But perhaps you had more detailed information about your region or your state or from your utility based on historic costs. And so you could override that with a different value if you wanted. You can also expand here to get access to all the inputs for each of these sections. And so that goes for the PV, where the ones, the inputs that are highlighted is the capital cost of the system and the incentives. And then you can expand to get access to additional parameters. So while we're on this inputs page here, I just wanted to point out this help link, which will take you to the user manual for this tool. So we'll give you an overview of how to use the tool, the inputs and outputs, as well as the default values, where those default values come from, and some typical ranges for those values. And so those are provided in this table here, and we plan to update those on an annual basis to make sure that our default values are as up to date as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and run this analysis now. I'm going to click Get Results. And what happens right now is that the information that we've entered is being sent to the optimization model. That's the same as the desktop REopt model. And depending on the complexity of the utility rate, this can take up to a couple of minutes. So I'm going to click over to a tab here where I already have some results loaded, so we don't have to sit and watch that timer go. So what's highlighted kind of at the top here on the results page is the size and combination of technologies that's recommended. So in this case, the tool is recommending both PV and battery to help lower utility costs. It gives you the size of each of those systems, so a 392 kilowatt PV system, along with a 93 kilowatt, 342 kilowatt hour battery. The tool can size the battery power and battery capacity independently to recommend the hour or size of battery that most cost effectively lowers your utility rates costs. The next output that's highlighted here is the savings that the combination, or the estimate of savings that the combination of these two technologies would provide over the analysis period. Next, you can scroll down to look at a dispatch plot of how these technologies are interacting throughout the year. So you can scroll through here from January through December. You can also zoom in on a particular day if you wanted, and see where the load, which is this black line, is being met either by the utility in gray, the PV system in red, or the battery in blue. So in this particular case, the PV system is generating throughout most of the day, and you can see the battery system is discharging in the evening or late afternoon when the battery, or when the output from the PV system starts to decline. Next is a more detailed look at the results, where you can compare the business as usual case, which is if you were to continue purchasing utility power over the 20-year analysis period, compared to the optimal case, which is what the tool is recommending, and then the difference between those two. So you can see again here the PV system size, but also the annualized PV energy production from that system, along with the total cost to install these two technologies. And then a look at what you're purchasing from the grid before installing the system, after installing the system, and what that difference is. You can also get a breakdown on your utility costs. So what were your energy costs, demand costs, and fixed costs, both before you implemented the system and after? And what were those annual savings? So in this particular case, you can see you're getting about $84,000 in savings per year from energy charges and about $21,000 in demand savings. You can also download a pro forma spreadsheet that gives you more detail about the results and what happens on a year-by-year basis over your analysis period. So the first tab here has a summary of your inputs and outputs, and then the second tab provides you with the year-by-year cash flow of the system. And then the final thing you're able to look at on this page is the outage simulations. So this evaluates the amount of time that your system can survive a grid outage. And the way we plot this is the probability of surviving an outage on the on one axis against the duration of that outage in hours. And so you can see here that you have an 80% probability of surviving a 1-hour outage. And then you have a 75% probability of surviving a 2-hour outage. And so you can use this plot here to get some statistics about the resiliency of these systems. So here you can see that the average resiliency from the system over the year is about 13 hours. The minimum possible case is that you won't survive an outage at all, and the maximum number of hours that you will be able to survive an outage is 90 hours. We have some suggested next steps here to help guide your analysis, making sure your inputs are correct, and thinking about how to refine the inputs to maybe look at different sets of results. So that's all that we had for this demo. I'm going to switch it over to our slides here just for a second. To go over a few resources that may be helpful to you.
So the first link listed here is the REopt website. So the REopt website includes a lot of information about the model, as well as case studies and example projects where we've used the tool, and a list of all of the reports and fact sheets and news articles and other resources that are available to describe the model and the projects we've used it on. The second link there is the REopt Lite web tool itself. So again, as we mentioned earlier, we really appreciate feedback on this beta version, and we'll definitely take into account your comments as we continue development over the next year. The third link there, the REopt technical report, if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of how this model works, all of the assumptions around the optimization, the finance inputs, the technology models themselves, all of that you can find in the REopt technical report. And then finally, the REopt fact sheet. Maybe if you're not as interested in all those details, the REopt fact sheet provides a good 2-page overview of the model. So Sam, I think at this point we can hand it back over to you and are happy to take any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kate and Emma. That was an excellent overview. We have got a lot of questions here. So up front, I just want to apologize to anyone. We are not going to get to all the questions, but I will we'll be sure to share these with Kate and Emma so that they can see any of the feedback. Some people have already suggested some things for REopt Lite. I'm going to stick to questions. I'm going to stick to ones that are pretty closely related to REopt Lite. We did have some questions at the beginning about REopt, and again, we'll pass those along to Kate and Emma. I also wanted to say for folks that are interested in using the tool that are working on low-income related projects, particularly nonprofit organizations, Clean Energy Group, through our Resilient Power Project, we are going to be using REopt Lite for some of our technical assistance that we're providing folks for these projects. And we're happy to work with folks in both helping to the training to learn how to use the tool, as well as running some analyses if folks would like some help with that. So please reach out to me if you are interested in running projects for the kinds of things that we support through our Resilient Power Project. All right, with that, there were a couple of questions about the capabilities of the tool, whether or not it could be used for single-family residential applications or people on residential rates. If not, if there are plans to add that, and if there was any plans to expand this outside of the United States as well.
That's a great question. So in terms of the residential modeling, if you upload your own custom load profile, then you can use it to model residential systems. We don't currently have a default load profile in there for a residential home, but if you upload your own profile, we do have residential utility rates in there, so you should be able to use it to model residential. That is something that we've been asked before, and we do plan in the future on adding a residential load profile as well. In terms of international, there we're just really limited by the utility rates that are available in the database. So as soon as we open up that ability to input your own custom utility rate tariffs, I think you'll be able to use this for international locations as well. We are planning to add that in the future as well.
Great, thanks. The question about how does this differ, or what are the advantages of this tool over another tool like NREL's System Advisor model, the SAM model?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the key differences between REopt and SAM is the integration and optimization piece. So SAM is a great model. We use it all the time in our group. We typically use it at a more detailed stage of project development when we want to get into a lot of the details around the financing of systems and modeling really specific technology components, because those kinds of options are not available in REopt. On the other hand, REopt does more of optimization of system sizes, optimization of dispatch strategy, as well as more integration with other technologies. And then the other key difference, I guess, is that SAM is a desktop-based tool, whereas REopt is web-based. So I think we see in the future that REopt will really be a building block that other people can use and pull into their own tools via the API.
Great, excellent. A question about the storage technologies. What is the default storage technology that's being used for this, and does it allow for other storage technologies? The assumption is that it's lithium-ion. Will it allow for lead-acid and flow batteries? If not, is that in the plans as well for future development?
Yeah, good question. So right now, the defaults are set to represent a lithium-ion battery, but you could absolutely change those defaults to represent other technology types. So the basic model still applies, but you might want to change, for example, the cost or the minimum state of charge or the maximum state of charge to represent other battery technologies.
Great. And on the PV side, can you model both rooftop and ground-mounted systems?
Yes. So in the PV section of the inputs, if you expand to see the more detailed inputs, you'll see there's a drop-down where you can select between rooftop and ground mount.
Excellent. So here's a question that I'm going to bring up, and I know it could be a whole webinar in itself, but the question was how is resiliency valued in the tool? I know this is something that we've discussed at length.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an area of research at NREL that we're really excited about. We've been doing a lot of work in that area and figuring out how to incorporate the value of resiliency into our models. The present beta version that we showed you today does not have a value of resiliency incorporated, but we do plan to add that this year, as we showed in the FY18 development plans. And so when we add that, we plan to include $1 per kilowatt hour value of resiliency that the user can enter. and then that would be incorporated into the economics. So for example, if you had a system that on average could sustain a 13-hour load, we would be able to calculate how many kilowatt hours that system could sustain and apply the resiliency value on a dollar per kilowatt hour basis. One of the things that we can do in our internal NREL models is consider that value of resiliency in the optimization, so actually consider it in the sizing of the system when we're finding that most cost-effective system size. Right now we are not planning to include that in the REopt Lite version just because it's pretty computationally complex. So right now what is planned for the REopt Lite version will be somewhat of a post-processing where we optimize the system not considering that resiliency value and then add it into the economics as a post-processing step. So just a little bit of a detail, but wanted to distinguish there.
Great. So a couple of questions about the utility rate. Does the tool have a way to deal with electricity user choice programs? Also, there was someone that tried the tool and found that no utility rates came up for their location in the state. I was wondering if there was a way to select their utility rate without entering a location or some way around that difficulty.
Yeah, great question. So in terms of utility choice, I think that's something that we do plan to add in the future because we recognize that there are a lot of deregulated markets and we need to include the capability to model more than one utility provider. So that's something that we do plan to add in the future, but is not currently in there. And the second piece on rates, so we are working through right now to make sure that utility rates come up in all locations, but that is a challenge that we've had in this beta version in just some of the programmatic ways that the utility rate database returns rates based on a location. And so we're hoping to have a better fix for that in the next month or two. But until then, I would say the one way to get around that is to enter a nearby location, because sometimes if the utility rate doesn't return for one specific town, it may come for the town next door. So I know that's not a great fix, but it is something we're aware of and working on.
Excellent, great. And yes, everyone, please go out and try the tool and send your feedback to Kate and Emma, and I'm sure they will address it in good time. There was a question, maybe you can go into a little more detail on the data source that's used for the typical building load profiles and how those are calculated for different buildings.
Sure. So we use the Department of Energy's commercial reference buildings. And I think on the input page there in the help text, there's a link to the commercial reference buildings website where you can see all of the assumptions that go into each of those building types. But basically, we run those 16 different building types through the 16 different ASHRAE climate zones to come up with simulated load profiles for each climate zone and building type combination. And then we scale those load profiles based on the annual energy consumption that the user enters.
Great, thank you. And question about additional revenue sources, such as capacity payments and frequency regulation payments. So I wanted to just confirm that functionality is not in there right now, and probably a question of whether there are plans to include that at a later date.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is something that is not in the REopt Lite model right now. Right now we're just looking at savings from peak shaving and energy arbitrage. But we do include that in a lot of the analysis that we do internally here at NREL, and we recognize that those are really important value streams, particularly in certain areas of the country. So I think we would like to expand and include that in the future, but it's not in there right now.
Okay, another question of what is and what will be is existing PV. Is there an option to just model storage added to an existing PV system?
So right now that is not in there, but that is part of the FY18 development plan, particularly as part of that resiliency capability. We're going to allow people to enter existing PV system, so that when we calculate the resiliency that a system can provide, we consider not only the new PV and storage we're recommending, but any existing PV or backup diesel generation that may already exist at the site.
Great. And how about net metering assumptions? Are those built into the calculations? Is there any customization based on location? How is that handled?
So net metering is one of the options available in the detailed assumptions. If you expand that inputs part of the tab, you can turn net metering on or off right now. So basically, if you turn net metering on, then we assume that any excess generation above the load is credited back to the site at the retail rate. And then if you turn it off, then we assume that any excess generation is valued at $0 per kilowatt hour. We do plan in FY18 to add a capability to specify a different value, so you won't be limited to just all or nothing, basically, 0 or full retail rate. You'll be allowed to specify a different rate for energy exported back to the grid.
Great. And how about a way, question, is there a way to adjust the building demand profile to just look at essential loads? So I assume this is when you're thinking about a resiliency application, if you can just select certain types of loads that you'd like to be backing up instead of full load or some portion of the typical load that a building has.
Yeah, so right now in the resiliency section of the inputs page, there is the option to specify a % of typical load. So for example, you could specify that 50% of your typical load is critical. In FY18, we do plan to add the capability to build up a critical load profile from specific equipment pieces and components. So that would give you another option for building a critical load profile. Rather than specifying it as a % of your typical load, you could list out specific equipment pieces, their capacity, and the hours that they run, and we would build up a critical load profile in that way. So that piece is coming in FY18.
Great. Some folks are already asking when API access will be available. Any guess on when that might be out there?
Yeah, we're planning to roll that out by the end of the calendar year, so that should be available by the end of December.
Excellent, that's great. So would you recommend using REopt Lite for a microgrid, an off-grid system, or would you think that it's not the best tool for that?
We do use the internal REopt model for off-grid systems. I don't think at this point REopt Lite would be ideal, though, for off-grid systems, just because it is so concentrated on, the cost of the utility grid, and we don't have a lot of options in there yet for things like diesel generators and cost of fuel. So I don't think at this point I would recommend REopt Lite for off-grid, but again, as we build out capabilities in the future, there may be a time in the future that it would be a good fit.
Great. And for folks that are on rates that are not in the utility rate database, is there any way to get those entered in, or what would be the way to go about doing that?
Yeah, so we're going to be adding the ability to enter your own custom utility rate input in FY18. And so, unfortunately, until then, there's not really a good way to do that. So that's one of our high priority items in 2018, is to make sure that we give people the ability to enter a rate that might not be in the rate database.
Great. So this is a question that I think would be difficult to implement, but just curious on your thoughts on it. A couple of people have mentioned the sizing parameters that it gives are not going to be system sizes that are commercially available. There may be something that's a similar sizing, but probably not when you're talking about weird numbers for the sizing. Right. Are there any thoughts of standardizing any of that, or allowing people to select certain commercially available system sizings?
Yeah, so right now what I would recommend for that is we do give sizes that are not necessarily commercially available. Like I think you saw in Emma's demo, there was like a 194 kilowatt system instead of a 200 kilowatt or something like that. What you might do is you might get the optimum system size out of the model, and then on the inputs page you could go back and set the minimum and maximum sizes of each technology to something that's close to that but is commercially available, and then run the analysis, and then you'll get outputs for something that is actually commercially available, but you'll know that it's close to the optimum size that REopt recommended.
Great. We're closely approaching 3 o'clock, so I think I'm just going to have a couple of more questions here, and then I'll turn it back to Sam to close people out. The tool, as I understand it, currently accepts hourly load data for a year. What about folks that have either more or less than that? Some people are going to have 15-minute interval data, and some people only have access to, say, monthly load data.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are going to try and add some flexibility there to allow people to upload different intervals of data. So right now, as you said, we request hourly, but we do plan to expand that, so you'll be able to upload 15-minute or 30-minute data. We could also consider a monthly data file format.
Great. So let's see, last question. Just going to say, so just wanted to make sure, one folks wanted to make sure that that demand charge reduction is one of the value streams that's being looked at in the optimization program for the battery side.
Yeah, that's correct. It's actually the primary value stream that's being looked at in REopt Lite right now is demand charge reduction.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to close things off there. Again, there are a lot of folks that we could not get to your questions, and apologize for that, but we'll pass these along to Kate and Emma, and if you don't get a response to your questions, please reach out to them directly or reach out to me, and I can make sure that they get your question. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to turn things back over to Sam to close things out.
Thanks, Seth, and thanks, Kate and Emma, for your excellent presentations. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this webinar was recorded, and we will be posting a copy of the recording and a PDF of the slides on our website at resilient-power.org. It'll be posted within about 24 or 48 hours. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email with a link to the webinar materials. If you have any questions or would like to find more information and resources, you can check out our website. You can contact Seth or our presenters. And we do have many webinars coming up, one in particular related to resilient power. It's on Thursday, November 16th. It's about the Marcus Garvey Apartments in Brooklyn, New York, and they have integrated a solar+storage microgrid into this affordable housing complex. So you can find out information about that webinar on our website, again, resilient-power.org. A lot of other upcoming webinars and resources there. I encourage you to check that out. And that's it for us today. Thanks everybody for joining us.